The smug Andromedan commander sneered as Captain Will Evans shouldered his puny rifle, mocking human weapons as useless against the Kraxon's shields. But he would soon choke on his words as the lead Kraxon flagship exploded into molten shrapnel under the humans' primitive guns. The arrogant fool didn't understand. Human ingenuity and grit more than made up for any perceived technological gap. Evans had seen it time and time again in the blood and mud of a dozen worlds. But there was no time to ponder the Andromedan's hubris now. Sirens screamed and lights flashed crimson as proximity alarms blared to life aboard the UEDF Indomitable. The Kraxon were here, and in force, enough ships to blot out the stars. If Evans and his Marines couldn't hold the line, the Epsilon Eridani colonies, millions of innocent men, women and children, would burn. He slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle. His hands were steady. It was time to show these damned aliens what primitive human guns could do. The Kraxon fleet emerged from the void, an endless swarm of ships darkening the stars. Admiral Vera's mandibles clicked as she surveyed the tactical display. The Andromedan commander of the Joint Fleet had never seen an armada so vast. She opened a fleet-wide channel, her voice steady despite the mounting dread. All ships, form a defensive perimeter around the inhabited planets. We must protect the colonies at all costs. On the surface of Epsilon Eridani III, Will Evans and his squad disembarked from their dropship, pulse rifles at the ready. The human colony was a hive of activity as soldiers and civilians alike prepared for the impending attack. Will checked his weapon, the weight familiar in his hands. He had fought the Kraxon before, and he knew their brutality firsthand. In space, the Andromedan ships took the lead, their sleek hulls bristling with advanced weaponry. They had always prided themselves on their technological superiority, and they were confident that their energy shields would withstand any attack. But as the Kraxon fleet closed in, they unleashed a barrage of unconventional weapons. Graviton pulses, singularity torpedoes, and strange, reality-warping fields that tore ships apart. The Andromedan shields flickered and died under the onslaught, leaving their ships vulnerable. Admiral Vera watched in horror as her fleet was decimated, their advanced technology useless against the Kraxon's sheer power. In desperation, she hailed the human ships. "UEDF vessels, we need your assistance. Our shields are down and we cannot hold them off alone." The human ships, once derided as primitive by the Andromedans, surged forward to engage the Kraxon fleet. Their nuclear missiles and kinetic weapons, dismissed as relics of a bygone era, slammed into the enemy ships with devastating force. The high-velocity projectiles punched through the Kraxon shields, while the immense explosive power of the Nukis shattered their hulls. On the surface of Epsilon Eridani III, Will and his squad were locked in a fierce battle with the Kraxon ground forces. The alien soldiers were genetically engineered killing machines, armed with advanced energy weapons that could melt through armor like butter, but the humans refused to yield, using guerrilla tactics and improvised weapons to even the odds. Will's M41A pulse rifle barked as he fired burst after burst into the Kraxon ranks. His squad followed his lead, using their mobility and knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the enemy. They set traps and ambushes, luring the Kraxon into kill zones where they could be cut down by crossfire. In space, the tide of the battle was turning. The human and Andromedan ships fought side by side, their combined firepower pushing back the Kraxon fleet. The once smug Andromedan commanders watched in awe as the human vessels, once dismissed as little more than target practice, proved their worth against a seemingly invincible foe. As the battle raged on, Admiral Vera couldn't help but marvel at the tenacity and resourcefulness of the humans. They had adapted to the Kraxon's tactics with astonishing speed, using their own weapons and strategies to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to these humans than met the eye. Admiral Kraxon's eyes narrowed as he watched the tactical display. The humans were proving to be more than just a nuisance. They were a legitimate threat to his conquest. He slammed his fist on the console, his voice booming across the bridge of the Kraxon flagship. Focus all fire on the human ships and their pathetic colony. We will crush their spirit by striking at their weakest link. The massive dreadnought turned its attention to the UEDF Indomitable, its devastating anti-matter cannon charging with an ominous hum. On the bridge of the Andromedan ship, Commander Zorak studied the battlefield, his mind racing. He turned to Captain Will Evans, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Captain Evans, I believe I have a plan. Your human weapons have proven their worth, and I think they may be the key to turning the tide of this battle." Will raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'm listening, Commander." Zorax brought up a schematic of the Kraxan flagship. "If we can get a team of your Marines armed with nuclear explosives inside their ship, they could disable the main cannon from within. It's a risky mission, but it may be our only chance." Will nodded, a grim determination settling over his features. "I'll lead the mission myself. Give me your best cloaked shuttle, and I'll handpick a team of my most skilled soldiers." As the Andromedan shuttle carrying Will and his team approached the Kraxan flagship, the Indomitable and the remaining human ships drew the fire of the enemy fleet. Explosions rocked the void as the ships exchanged volleys of missiles and kinetic rounds. Inside the flagship, alarms blared as Will and his Marines made their way through the corridors, engaging in fierce close-quarters combat with the Kraxan soldiers. The humans' superior training and adaptability proved invaluable as they pushed deeper into the ship, leaving a trail of fallen enemies in their wake. They reached the control room of the antimatter cannon, only to find it heavily guarded by Kraxan elite soldiers. A brutal battle erupted, the confined space lit by the flashes of pulse rifles and energy weapons. Will's team fought valiantly, but the Kraxan elites were formidable foes. One by one the Marines fell until only Will remained, battered and bloody but refusing to yield. In a last-ditch effort, Will armed the nuclear explosives, knowing that he would not survive the blast. As the timer ticked down, he thought of his fallen comrades, of the colonies he had sworn to protect. With a final defiant roar, he detonated the explosives, sacrificing himself to destroy the cannon and cripple the Kraxan flagship. The destruction of the flagship sent shockwaves through the Kraxan fleet, their resolve wavering in the face of such a devastating blow. Admiral Vera seized the opportunity, her voice ringing out across the comm channels. The joint human Andromedan fleet surged forward as one, their weapons blazing. The once disorganized Kraxan forces faltered under the onslaught, their formation crumbling. The tide of the battle had turned, and the Allies pressed their advantage, determined to drive the invaders back into the void from whence they came. The news of Captain Will Evans's sacrifice spread like wildfire through the joint fleet and the besieged colony below. Soldiers, civilians, and Andromedan allies alike spoke his name with reverence, their hearts heavy with the weight of his loss. But even as they mourned, a new fire ignited within them, a determination to honor his memory and finish what he started. On the surface of Epsilon Eridani III, Sergeant Jack Hawkins gathered the remaining Marines and colonial militia. He looked out at the faces before him, seeing the same grief and anger that he felt reflected in their eyes. "Captain Evans gave his life to give us a fighting chance," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "We won't let that sacrifice be in vain. We're going to take the fight to the Kraxan, and we're going to make them pay for every inch of our world they've dared to set foot on." The soldiers nodded, their resolve hardening. They armed themselves with a motley assortment of human and salvaged Andromedan weapons, jury-rigging them to work together in ways the Kraxan would never expect. Hawkins led a small team in a daring infiltration of the Kraxan's main ground base. They moved like ghosts through the enemy lines, using the terrain and the Kraxan's own overconfidence against them. Whenever a patrol drew near, they would strike from the shadows, dispatching the enemy with brutal efficiency before melting back into the darkness. As they delved deeper into the base, they stumbled upon a hidden research facility. Inside, they found a trove of captured human and Andromedan technology, weapons, armor, even ships. But what truly chilled Hawkins to the bone was the realization of what the Kraxan were doing with it all. "They've been studying us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "trying to figure out how to turn our own weapons against us." The team wasted no time in planting explosives throughout the facility. As they made their escape, the ground shook with the force of the detonations, the Kraxen's twisted research going up in flames. In space, Commander Zorax stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The human ship had taken heavy damage, but it still had fight left in it. And with Zorax at the helm, it would make that fight count. He hailed the other ships of the joint fleet, his voice filled with a newfound respect for his human allies. "Captain Evans showed us the true strength of the human spirit," he said. "Now it's our turn to show the Kraxen the strength of our combined might. We will fight as one, and we will prevail." The fleet moved as one, human nuclear missiles and Andromedan energy beams weaving together in a devastating ballet of destruction. The Kraxen ships, already reeling from the loss of their flagship, began to crumble under the onslaught. But just as victory seemed within reach, a new horror emerged from the depths of the Kraxon fleet. A massive, twisted creature, a nightmarish fusion of flesh and metal, burst forth from the largest of the enemy ships. It was a Kraxon behemoth, a bioengineered monstrosity designed to turn the tide of any battle. The creature tore through the human and Andromedan ships with terrifying ease, its massive claws and pulsing energy fields ripping through hulls like tissue paper. Zorax watched in horror as ship after ship fell before the behemoth's onslaught. On the surface, Hawkins and his team saw the new threat appear in the skies above. They knew that if the behemoth wasn't stopped, all their sacrifices would be for nothing. "Zorax, this is Hawkins," he called over the comm. "That thing's going to tear us apart up there. We need a plan, and we need it now." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then Zorax's voice crackled to life. "I have an idea, Sergeant, but it's going to take all of us working together to pull it off. Here's what we're going to do." The two leaders began to formulate a desperate plan, knowing that the fate of the Epsilon Eridani system, and perhaps the entire war, hung in the balance. The behemoth loomed before them, a seemingly unstoppable force of destruction, but the humans and Andromedans had faced impossible odds before, and they would do so again, for the memory of Will Evang and for the future of all those who called this corner of the galaxy home. They would find a way to victory, no matter the cost. Sergeant Hawkins gripped his modified M41A pulse rifle, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the Kraxen behemoth. The creature's hide was a patchwork of metal and flesh, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. He turned to Commander Zorax, the Andromedan's face a mask of grim determination. "Those armor-piercing rounds you provided should punch through its hide," Hawkins said. "But we'll need to hit it where it's vulnerable. Eyes, mouth, any gaps in its armor." Zorax nodded, his fingers dancing across a glowing control panel. "I'll coordinate the nanobot swarm. They'll infiltrate the behemoth's body and disrupt its internal systems. Between your sharpshooters and my nanobots, we might just have a chance." Hawkins assembled his team of the best marksmen from the colonial militia and the surviving Marines. They took up positions on the hulls of nearby ships and the rocky outcroppings of asteroids, their rifles trained on the approaching monstrosity. The behemoth let out a roar that shook the very fabric of space, its massive form barreling through the debris of destroyed ships. It lashed out with razor-sharp claws and pulsing energy fields, tearing through metal and stone alike. "Fire!" Hawkins ordered, his voice crackling over the comm. The sharpshooters opened up, their armor-piercing rounds streaking through the void. The high-intensity laser targeting systems painted the behemoth's eyes and mouth, guiding the bullets to their marks. The creature howled in pain as the rounds found their targets, cracking its armored hide and drawing spurts of viscous black blood. At the same time, Zorax unleashed his nanobot swarm. The microscopic machines poured into the behemoth's wounds, invading its body like a metallic virus. They burrowed into its flesh, severing nerve connections and disrupting the flow of energy that powered its monstrous form. The behemoth thrashed and writhed, its movements becoming erratic as the nanobots did their work. It lashed out blindly, its claws tearing through the void in a desperate attempt to strike at its tormentors. But even as it weakened, the behemoth's fury only grew. With a final, defiant roar, it launched itself toward the Indomitable, its massive form hurtling through space like a living missile. Zorax's eyes widened as he realized the creature's intent. He slammed his fist on the comm button, his voice echoing through the ship. "All hands, abandon ship! I repeat, abandon ship!" As the crew scrambled to the escape pods, Zorax remained on the bridge, his fingers flying over the controls. He knew that the behemoth had to be stopped, no matter the cost. The creature loomed closer, its maw open in a silent scream of rage. Zorax closed his eyes, his hand hovering over the reactor control. He thought of his fallen comrades, of the sacrifices they had made to bring them to this moment. "For the Alliance," he whispered. And then he pressed the button. The Indomitable's reactor went critical, a blinding flash of light consuming the ship and the behemoth alike. The explosion tore through the void, a miniature supernova that lit up the darkness of space. When the light faded, the behemoth was gone, reduced to scattered atoms and drifting debris, and with it, the last of the Craxon's hope for victory. The Craxon fleet, their secret weapon destroyed and their forces in disarray, began to retreat. The human and Andromedan ships pressed the advantage, chasing them back into the depths of space. But even as the cheers of victory echoed through the fleet, there was a somber undercurrent. They had won, but the cost had been high. Captain Will Evans, Commander Zorax, and countless others had given their lives to secure this victory. In the aftermath of the battle, Sergeant Hawkins stood on the surface of Epsilon Eridani III, his eyes fixed on the stars above. The Andromedans, once so dismissive of humanity, now stood alongside them as equals. They had fought and bled together, and in doing so had forged a bond that would not be easily broken. As he watched, a new ship rose from the planet's surface, its hull gleaming in the light of the system's sun. It was a joint human Andromedan vessel, a symbol of the alliance they had forged in the crucible of war. And on its hull a name was emblazoned in bold letters, UEDF Evans, a tribute to the man who had given his life to make this moment possible. Hawkins felt a smile tug at his lips, even as tears stung his eyes. They had lost much, but they had also gained something invaluable, a future where humans and Andromedans stood together, ready to face whatever challenges the universe might throw their way. And he knew deep in his heart that Will Evans and Zorax would be proud. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.